I'm glad to have you here.
Oh my
Follow
God.
my story until the
I
end and
can't
comment
believe
the
it.
city you're watching from. Mom, figure it out, not my problem. My own daughter's voice cut through the phone before she hung up on me. I stared at my cell phone, the lottery ticket worth $333 million sitting on my kitchen table, and smiled. Melissa had just failed the most important test of her life, and she didn't even know it. You're probably wondering how a 67-year-old grandmother from Ohio ended up with a fortune this size, testing her own children like some kind of modern fairy tale. Well, let me take you back to where this all started. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning that changed everything. I'm Deborah Taylor, and I've been buying the same lottery numbers for 15 years. My late husband's birthday, our anniversary, and the day my grandson Marcus was born. Call it sentiment, call it superstition, but those numbers meant something to me. Walter Robinson, my neighbor for the past 2 decades, always joked that I was throwing away good coffee money. Deborah, the odds of winning are worse than getting struck by lightning while being eaten by a shark, he'd say every Thursday as I walked to Miller's Corner store. My little 2-bedroom house had been our family home since James and I married 45 years ago. After he passed from heart disease 8 years back, Thomas and Melissa started suggesting I downsize. "The house is too big for just one person, Mom," Thomas would say. Though it went down 200 square feet, it was hardly a mansion. The truth was, they saw my home as their inheritance. I'd overheard Melissa at Christmas last year, whispering to her husband about finally getting some decent inheritance when the old lady kicks the bucket. She thought I was in the kitchen, out of earshot. Old doesn't mean deaf, sweetheart. My Social Security check covered the basics, but not much else. I'd started rationing my heart medication, taking it every other day instead of daily. Medicare's donut hole was more like a canyon for someone on a fixed income. But I'd never complained to my children. Pride, perhaps, or not wanting to be a burden. The irony was, I'd helped both Thomas and Melissa financially for years. Thomas's college tuition, Melissa's first car, the down payment on their homes. I'd dipped into my retirement savings more than once, leaving my own future uncertain. Not that they seemed to remember. Marcus was my bright spot. At 20, he was studying business at Ohio State on scholarship. He'd call me twice a week just to chat, asking about my garden or sharing stories from his classes. When he visited, he'd fix things around the house without being asked. "Just keeping Grandpa's memory alive," he'd say with that crooked smile that mirrored his grandfather's. "You should ask Mom and Dad for help," he'd suggested last month when he noticed my pill organizer wasn't fully stocked. "They could easily help with your medication." I'd changed the subject. My problems weren't his burden to bear. Besides, I knew what their answer would be. The Tuesday that changed everything started like any other. I woke at 6 a.m., made my single cup of coffee, and turned on the morning news. They were announcing the Mega Millions numbers as I buttered my toast. And the winning numbers are 14, 23, 31, 42, 58, and the Mega Ball is 9. My hand froze midair. Those were my numbers. The piece of toast dropped to my plate as I scrambled to the refrigerator where my ticket was magneted next to a photo of Marcus at his high school graduation. I checked each number 3 times, my heart pounding so hard I had to sit down. All 6 numbers matched perfectly. $383 million. After taxes, still over $200 million, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. My first instinct was to call Thomas, then Melissa, then little Marcus. But something held me back. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the phone. Not my children's numbers, but the lottery office. I needed to confirm this was real before telling anyone. "Ma'am, I can verify that you hold the winning ticket," the lottery official said after I read off the numbers and the ticket's serial code. "Congratulations. We'll need you to come to our Columbus office to process your claim. Do you have someone who can accompany you?" Did I? The question hit harder than it should have. I hung up the phone and sank into my kitchen chair, staring at the ticket that had just transformed my life. $333 million. The number was incomprehensible. I could buy my medication without worry. I could fix the roof that leaked during heavy rains. I could help Marcus finish college without student loans. But then Melissa's words echoed in my mind. Finally getting some decent inheritance when the old lady kicks the bucket. And Thomas's constant hints. "That house is too much for you, Mom. You should consider one of those senior communities." A strange calm settled over me. For the first time in years, I had power. Real power. And I wanted to know who truly deserved to share in it. I called Walter. "Can you drive me to Columbus tomorrow? There's something important I need to do." "Everything okay, Deborah?" Concern laced his voice. "Better than okay," I said. "I'll explain on the way." I spent that evening alone with my secret, making notes in my journal. If my children truly loved me, they'd help when I needed it most, right? Even if they thought I had nothing to give in return. The idea formed slowly, then crystallized into a plan, a test, simple but revealing. The next morning, Walter's eyes nearly popped out of his head when I showed him the ticket. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he whispered. "You're rich, Deborah. Filthy rich." "I'm the same person I was yesterday," I said, "just with different options." "Your kids are going to lose their minds," he said, pulling onto the highway toward Columbus. I stared out the window at the Ohio countryside. "They don't know yet, and they won't for a while." "What? Why not tell them? This is life-changing." "Exactly," I said. "And before lives change, I need to know who deserves it." At the lottery office, I chose the lump sum option. After taxes, I'd receive just over $210 million. I also requested anonymity, which Ohio law fortunately allows. The officials explained it would take about 3 weeks to process everything. "Perfect," I said. "That gives me time." Walter dropped me at home with a promise to keep my secret. "Though I still think you should tell your kids," he added. "I will," I assured him, "when the time is right." That night I didn't sleep, not from excitement, but from planning. First thing the next morning, I called Beverly Washington, a respected elder law attorney recommended by a friend from church. Beverly's office was in a converted Victorian home downtown, with wide oak floors and tall windows. At 65, she had silver hair cut in a stylish bob and eyes that missed nothing. "So," she said once I'd signed her confidentiality agreement and explained my situation, "you've won the lottery and want to keep it secret from your family while you, test them?" "It sounds cruel when you put it that way," I admitted. She leaned back in her leather chair. "Not cruel, cautious. Money changes people, Ms. Taylor. Sometimes it just amplifies who they already are." I liked her immediately. "Tell me about your children," she said. For the next hour, I shared Thomas and Melissa's life stories, their successes and struggles, their gradual distancing, the comments that had hurt over the years. I told her about Marcus, too, and his unwavering kindness. "Thomas is going through a difficult divorce," I explained, "paying alimony and child support for his 2 teenagers. Melissa is a single mother trying to complete her MBA while working full-time. I understand their stress, but it doesn't excuse treating you as an afterthought," Beverly finished. I nodded, eyes suddenly damp. "Here's what we'll do," Beverly said, pulling out a legal pad. "First, we'll set up a series of trusts. One for you, one potentially for each family member, and one for charitable purposes. Second, we'll document your current financial relationship with your children, loans, gifts, anything you've given them. Third, we'll protect you from potential guardianship attempts if they ever claim you're incapable of managing your affairs. They wouldn't, I started, then stopped. Would they? The thought chilled me. Let's also document your current health status with your primary physician, she continued. Establish a clear baseline of your mental competency, just precautionary. We spent the rest of the meeting outlining my financial plan. By the time I left, I had a comprehensive strategy and had scheduled meetings with a financial advisor Beverly recommended, Michael Harris. My next step was to meet my closest friends for our monthly lunch. Ruth Coleman, Patricia Green, and Eleanor Wilson had been my support system since James died. We'd met in a widow's support group and formed an unbreakable bond. We sat at our usual table at Magnolia Cafe, and after our orders were placed, I took a deep breath. I need to tell you something, but it can't leave this table. 3 pairs of eyes widened as I shared my news and my plan. Oh my God, Deborah, Patricia whispered. 200 million? That's life-changing. That's precisely why I'm being careful, I explained. Ruth, always the most practical, nodded slowly. Smart, very smart. Money brings out the worst in people sometimes. But a test? Eleanor asked, concern crossing her face. Isn't that a bit manipulative? I stirred my iced tea. Is it manipulative to want to know if my children would help me if I truly needed it? To know if they see me as anything more than a future inheritance? Thomas hasn't exactly been son of the year, Ruth pointed out. Remember when he forgot your birthday 2 years in a row? And Melissa borrowing money for that spa retreat after her divorce, Patricia added. Did she ever pay you back? I shook my head. Neither of them has repaid a dime of what I've lent them over the years. I've kept track. It's over $63,000 combined. Eleanor's expression softened. And sweet Marcus? Are you testing him too? I am, I said, though I expect a different result. What exactly is your test? Ruth asked. I'm going to call each of them and tell them I need help with my heart medication, that I can't afford it this month and my health is at risk. Then I'll see who offers to help. And if they don't? Patricia asked quietly. I met her eyes steadily. Then I'll have my answer. That evening, alone in my house, I sat in James's old armchair, his photo on the side table. What would you think of all this, love? I whispered. Am I being unfair? The house remained silent, but I felt a strange peace settle over me. James had always said that character revealed itself in times of need. I was about to discover the true character of our children. The next day, Michael Harris walked me through investment strategies, tax implications, and philanthropic options for my newfound wealth. By the end of our 3rd meeting, I had a clear plan for financial security and growth. You're in an unusual position, Ms. Taylor, Michael said. Most lottery winners come in wanting to buy mansions and sports cars immediately. I smiled. At my age, what would I do with a sports car? I want security, comfort, and the ability to help those who deserve it. For 3 weeks, I prepared meticulously. The trusts were established. My medical competency was documented. My financial plan was in place. The Lottery Commission had processed my winnings, and an astounding $210 million now sat in my accounts. Through it all, I maintained my normal routine. I shopped at the same grocery store, attended church, worked in my garden. No one except Walter, Beverly, Michael, and my 3 friends knew about my win. Finally, it was time for the test. The night before I planned to make the calls, I couldn't sleep. Was I being petty? Vindictive? Maybe Thomas and Melissa had their reasons for drifting away. Maybe my expectations were unreasonable. At 3 a.m., I made tea and sat on my back porch watching the stars. James and I used to sit here together on summer nights. The universe puts everyone in their right place eventually, he'd say. Was I interfering with that natural order? No, I decided finally. I wasn't changing anyone's fate, just revealing their character. And in doing so, revealing mine as well. Morning came with a soft rain pattering against the windows. I showered, dressed carefully in a blue blouse James had always loved, and sat at my kitchen table with my phone and a notepad. My heart pounded as I dialed Melissa's number first. She answered on the fourth ring, the sound of office noise in the background. "Mom, I'm at work. Can this wait?" "I'm sorry to bother you, honey," I said, my voice deliberately fragile. I'm having trouble this month with my medication costs. The donut hole in Medicare. I was wondering if you might be able to help just until my next Social Security check. How much? Her voice was immediately wary. About $200 for my heart medication. There was a pause, then a sigh. Mom, I'm swamped with Marcus's college expenses and my MBA program. I just paid $3,000 in tuition last week. I understand, but Mom, figure it out, not my problem. The line went dead. I sat still, the phone clutched in my hand. Even though I'd expected this response, the reality of hearing my daughter dismiss my health so callously stung worse than anticipated. I wrote her exact words in my notebook, hands trembling slightly. Next, I called Thomas. He answered immediately. "Hey, Mom. In a meeting in 5. What's up?" I repeated the same story about needing help with medication costs. "Mom," he said, his voice taking on that condescending tone he'd perfected since becoming a bank manager. "I can't keep enabling this behavior. You need to learn to live within your means." Enabling this behavior? I almost laughed. The woman who'd raised him and his sister alone after their father died, who'd worked double shifts at the diner to pay for their college educations, was being lectured about money management by a man whose student loans I'd quietly paid off 5 years ago. "Thomas, I'm not asking for much, just enough to cover my medication until my Social Security check arrives." I kept my voice steady, though inside I was already grieving for the son I thought I knew. "Look, Mom, this is exactly what Melissa and I were talking about. You're getting older, and maybe it's time to consider some changes. Have you looked into those senior communities we mentioned? They handle all your medications, meals, everything." So my children had been discussing my future behind my back. How thoughtful of them. "Let me think about it," I said, though I'd already heard enough. But Thomas wasn't finished delivering his lesson. "And Mom, I'm going to have to block your number for a while. Melissa thinks we're being too soft, and maybe she's right. Sometimes tough love is what people need to face reality." The line went dead. My own son had just blocked me rather than help with a prescription that might keep me alive. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd bandaged Thomas's scraped knees and helped him with homework, where I'd celebrated Melissa's good grades and comforted her through her divorce. The lottery ticket was still on my refrigerator, worth more than this entire neighborhood. And my own children wanted to ship me off to a nursing home rather than help with medication. But Marcus had always been different. He was Melissa's son, but somehow he'd inherited none of her selfishness. He was the one who called just to check on me, who remembered my birthday without Facebook reminders, who still hugged me tight when he visited. I dialed his number with trembling fingers, hoping I wasn't setting myself up for another heartbreak. Marcus answered on the second ring. I could hear campus noise in the background. "Grandma Deborah, what's up?" His voice was warm, genuinely happy to hear from me. "Marcus, honey, I hate to bother you, but I'm in a bit of a pickle." I explained the same story about needing help with medication costs. There was a pause, and my heart started to sink. Then he said the words that changed everything. "How much do you need? I've got about $500 in savings, and I can drive down this weekend. Are you okay? Do you need me to take you to the doctor?" $100, it was probably every penny he had saved from his part-time job at the campus bookstore. He was offering me his entire emergency fund without hesitation, and he wanted to drive 400 miles just to check on me. "Oh, sweetie, I couldn't take your money," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Grandma, you've never asked me for anything ever. If you need help, I'm coming. No arguments." After I hung up, I knew what I had to do. Marcus had passed the test with flying colors, but his mother and uncle were about to learn a very expensive lesson about family loyalty. I called Beverly immediately. "I'm ready for the next phase," I told her. "They failed?" She didn't sound surprised. "Spectacularly. But Marcus offered everything he had." "Then we proceed as planned. I'll have the documents ready tomorrow." Next, I called Michael. "I want to make a purchase," I said. "A new Honda Civic for my grandson." Michael hesitated. "Are you sure you want to start with big purchases before we fully implemented the investment strategy?" I laughed. "Michael, I have $210 million. A $25,000 car is a rounding error." "Fair point," he conceded. "I'll arrange it. Color preference?" "Silver. And I want it delivered to my house by Friday. Marcus is coming to visit." Finally, I called Walter. "The test is complete," I said, "and I need your help with something." "Name it," he replied without hesitation. "I need a witness for what's about to happen." That weekend, I bought Marcus a new car. I had it delivered Friday morning, a shiny silver Honda Civic with a big red bow on top parked in my driveway. When Marcus arrived that evening, having taken the bus from Columbus, his face when he saw it was worth every penny. "Grandma, whose car is that?" he asked, his backpack slipping from his shoulder. "Yours," I said simply, holding out the keys. His mouth opened and closed several times, no sound coming out. "Mine? But how? Why? You just called about needing money for medication." I took his hand and led him to the porch swing. "Sit down, sweetheart. I have quite a story to tell you." For the next hour, I explained everything. The lottery win, the test, his mother and uncle's responses, and his own generous offer. His expressions cycled from shock to disbelief to understanding. "So you're rich? Like, really rich?" "Like really rich," I confirmed, mimicking his young person's inflection. "And Mom and Uncle Thomas don't know?" I shook my head. "Not yet," he whistled low. "They're going to freak out." "Yes," I agreed. "They certainly are." Marcus leaned back on the swing, processing. "I don't know what to say about the car. It's too much." "It's nothing compared to what you offered me," I said, squeezing his hand. "You were willing to give me your last dollar when you thought I needed help. That's worth more than any lottery." He hugged me then, tight and long. "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, sweetheart. And I need your help with what comes next." "What's the plan?" he asked, eyes sparkling with the same mischief his grandfather's had held. "Tomorrow you'll wash your new car in the driveway. I've invited your mother for lunch. She'll see the car, ask questions, and we'll take it from there." "What about Uncle Thomas?" "Oh, I expect your mother will call him immediately. He'll show up too." Marcus grinned. "This is going to be better than those reality TV shows Mom watches." Saturday morning dawned clear and warm. Marcus was up early, washing his new car with exuberant care. I made a pitcher of sweet tea, Melissa's favorite, and set out cookies on the porch. Then I called Walter, who arrived promptly at 11:30, taking a seat on my porch like he did most Saturdays. At noon exactly, Melissa's Mercedes pulled into my driveway. She stepped out, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, and froze when she saw Marcus with the new car. "Whose car is that?" she called out, walking toward her son. "Mine," Marcus replied, grinning widely. "Grandma bought it for me. Can you believe it?" I watched Melissa's face cycle through confusion, suspicion, and finally anger. Her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't move in the breeze. Hairspray will do that. Mom, can we talk? Melissa's voice was tight. Inside. Now. Just as we were heading in, Thomas's BMW pulled up. He must have been nearby when Melissa inevitably called him. He took in the scene, his face going through the same emotional journey as his sister's. We gathered in my living room, the same room where Thomas and Melissa had played with their toys 40 years ago. Melissa perched on the edge of my sofa like she was afraid it might contaminate her designer dress. "Where did you get the money for a car?" Thomas demanded, having let himself in without knocking. "Last week you were calling us, begging for help with prescriptions." Was I begging? I tilted my head, genuinely curious about his word choice. I thought I was asking my children for assistance. Silly me. "Don't play games, Mom," Melissa snapped. "How much did that car cost? $20,000? $25,000? Where did that money come from?" I settled into my favorite armchair, the one James had bought me for our 20th anniversary. "Well, I decided not to buy my heart medication this month. Apparently, cars for loving grandsons are more important than keeping this old ticker beating." Melissa gasped. "Mom, that's crazy. You can't stop taking your medication." "Oh, now you're concerned about my health. How thoughtful." Thomas caught on to my sarcasm. "This is insane," he muttered, running his hands through his thinning hair. "Marcus, get in here." My grandson appeared in the doorway, still beaming. At 20, he had his mother's dark eyes, but thankfully not her selfish heart. "You can't accept this car," Thomas said firmly. "Your grandmother clearly isn't thinking straight. She stopped taking her medication to buy you a car. That's not love. That's mental illness." "Uncle Thomas, what are you talking about?" Marcus looked genuinely confused. "Grandma's fine. We had a great talk yesterday about college, my job, everything. She's sharper than all of us." "Your grandmother called us last week begging for money," Melissa interjected. "Now suddenly she has $25,000 for a car. Something doesn't add up." Marcus looked at his mother, then at his uncle, and I saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "You called them asking for help?" he asked me quietly. I nodded. I told them I needed assistance with my medication costs. "And what did they say?" Thomas and Melissa suddenly found my carpet very interesting. The silence stretched until Marcus filled it. "They said no, didn't they?" His voice was flat. "My own mother and uncle refused to help you with medicine. You need to stay alive." "Now, Marcus, it's not that simple," Thomas started. But Marcus held up his hand. "But when I offered to help, you bought me a car instead." Marcus's voice was soft with wonder. "This whole thing was a test, wasn't it, Grandma?" Smart boy. But his mother and uncle were about to get much smarter, too. "A test?" Melissa's voice rose to that pitch that could probably shatter glass. "Are you seriously telling me this was all some elaborate scheme?" I looked at this woman I'd given birth to, with her perfectly styled hair and designer handbag that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "Scheme is such an ugly word, Melissa. I prefer to think of it as a character assessment." Thomas started pacing, which he'd done since he was a little boy whenever he was upset. "This is manipulation, Mom. Pure and simple manipulation." "Is it manipulation when someone shows you their true colors?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "I made a simple request for help. Marcus immediately offered everything he had and wanted to drive 400 miles to check on me. You, Thomas, lectured me about enabling behavior and blocked my number. Melissa told me it wasn't her problem. Those were your choices, not mine." "We had valid concerns," Thomas protested. "You've been struggling financially, making poor decisions." "Have I?" I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a folder I'd prepared for this moment. "Let's talk about poor financial decisions, shall we? Thomas, remember when you bought that boat 2 years ago? The one you couldn't afford? Who quietly paid off your credit card debt so you could get financing for your house? Thomas's face went pale. Melissa turned to stare at her brother. And Melissa, that spa retreat you took after your divorce when you were getting back on your feet. Who do you think covered your rent for 3 months while you found yourself? How did you... Melissa started, then stopped. I know about all of it. Every emergency loan you never paid back, every favor you forgot to acknowledge, every time you took my help for granted while planning what you'd inherit when I'm gone. I sat back down, amazed at how calm I felt. Did you really think I was going to spend my remaining years being treated like a convenient ATM by my own children? Marcus was staring at his mother and uncle like he'd never seen them before. You guys have been taking money from Grandma while complaining to me about your finances? While telling me you couldn't help with my textbooks because money was tight? That's different, Melissa said weakly. How is it different? Marcus challenged. We're adults with responsibilities. You're a college student, Thomas replied defensively. Marcus shook his head in disgust. No, Uncle Thomas. I'm a college student with a part-time job and a grandmother who taught me the value of working for what you want. Unlike some people. Melissa was crying now, but I suspected they were tears of frustration, not remorse. Mom, I apologize if we seemed ungrateful, but you have to understand our position. I'm a single mother. Thomas has his own expenses. You have champagne taste on a beer budget, I said simply. And you've both been supplementing your income with my generosity for years while treating me like a burden. So what now? Thomas asked, his voice bitter. You're cutting us off? Choosing Marcus over your own children? I'm choosing kindness over entitlement, I replied. Marcus has never asked me for anything, yet when I needed help, he offered everything. You've both asked for plenty, but offered nothing in return. The room fell silent except for Melissa's sniffling. Finally, Marcus spoke up. Grandma, can I ask you something? His voice was careful, like he was handling something fragile. Of course, sweetheart. Just how rich are you? And that's when I decided it was time for the second phase of my plan. I smiled at my grandson, this young man who'd proven himself worthy of trust when his own mother and uncle had failed so spectacularly. Marcus, what would you say if I told you that your dear old grandmother won the lottery 3 weeks ago? He blinked. I'd say that explains the car. Thomas snorted. Mom, be serious. How much could you have won? A few thousand? Maybe $10,000. Try again. Melissa stopped crying, suddenly very interested in our conversation. What do you mean, try again? I walked to my refrigerator and returned with the lottery ticket, the one that had been hanging there for 3 weeks like a perfectly ordinary piece of paper. I handed it to Marcus. Read the numbers, sweetheart. Marcus looked at the ticket, then at me, then back at the ticket. His face went completely white. Grandma, this is the winning numbers for the Mega Millions jackpot from 3 weeks ago, I finished gently. $333 million. Thomas lunged for the ticket, but Marcus pulled it back. Uncle Thomas, don't. Let me see that, Melissa demanded, but I held up my hand. The ticket is just a souvenir now. The money has already been claimed, invested, and placed in trusts. I settled back into my chair, enjoying the look of pure shock on their faces. Turns out, when you're worth over $200 million after taxes, a $25,000 car is basically pocket change. The silence that followed my revelation was so complete, I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. James had bought that clock on our 10th anniversary, and its steady rhythm had marked every family milestone since. Now it was marking another one, the moment my children realized what they'd thrown away. $200 million? Thomas finally whispered, his voice cracking. You won $200 million and didn't tell us. I told the people who deserved to know, I replied, looking pointedly at Marcus. Melissa was shaking her head, mascara-stained tears leaving dark tracks down her cheeks. Mom, this isn't fair. You set us up. You tricked us. Did I trick you into saying, figure it out, not my problem, when your mother asked for help with life-saving medication? I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Did I somehow force Thomas to block my number rather than spare $200? Walter, who had been silently watching from his seat by the window, cleared his throat. I was there when she bought the ticket. When she found out she'd won. She didn't rush to buy herself fancy things. She thought of you all first. Then why the test? Thomas demanded, color rising in his face. Why not just share it with your family? Because I needed to know who my family truly was, I said simply. Money doesn't just change people, Thomas. It reveals them. Marcus had been silent, still staring at the lottery ticket in his hands. So the car, is it really mine to keep? Of course it is, sweetheart, I assured him. Consider it the first installment of my gratitude for showing me that kindness still exists in this family. Thomas stood up abruptly. This is about control. You've always needed to control everything, and now you finally have the power to do it. Well, congratulations, Mom. You've made your point. I shook my head slowly. No, Thomas, I don't think I have. Not yet. Melissa was now frantically wiping her tears, straightening her posture, clearly trying to salvage the situation. Mom, we're sorry if we seemed insensitive. It's been a difficult time for both of us. If you'd known I was rich, you would have helped me, I finished for her. That's exactly the problem, Melissa. You both see me as a resource, not a person. Marcus stood up, putting a protective hand on my shoulder. I think Grandma needs a break. This is a lot of emotion for one day. Don't you dare tell us to leave, Thomas snapped at his nephew. This is between us and our mother. No, Marcus is right, I said, covering his hand with mine. I think we all need time to process. We can continue this conversation tomorrow, after church. You expect us to sit in church pretending everything is normal after dropping a bombshell like this? Melissa's voice had risen to that shrill pitch again. I expect you to respect my wishes in my home, I replied firmly. We'll talk tomorrow at 2. Or not at all. Your choice. Thomas looked like he might argue, but something in my expression must have stopped him. He grabbed his car keys from his pocket. Fine, tomorrow at 2. But this conversation is far from over. As they walked toward the door, I called after them. Oh, and please don't try contacting my financial advisors or attorneys tonight. They have strict instructions not to speak with anyone but me. The door slammed so hard that one of James's fishing photos fell from the wall. Walter whistled low. Well, that went about as expected. Marcus sank back onto the sofa. Grandma, that was intense. It needed to be, I said, suddenly feeling every one of my 67 years weighing on my shoulders. I'm sorry you had to see your mother like that. I'm not, Marcus replied, his young face surprisingly determined. I needed to see who she really is, who they both are. Walter stood up, patting my shoulder gently. I'll head home and let you two have some time. Call if you need anything, Deborah. After Walter left, Marcus helped me clean up the untouched tea and cookies. We worked in comfortable silence until he finally spoke. What happens now, Grandma? I looked at this young man, so different from his mother, so much like James in his quiet integrity, and felt a surge of fierce love. Now we prepare for tomorrow, because what they learned today is only the beginning. Marcus insisted on staying overnight. He slept in his old room, the one that still had his high school track trophies and science fair ribbons on the shelf. I lay awake most of the night, second-guessing my decisions, wondering if I'd gone too far. By morning, I'd made peace with my plan. This wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. And sometimes truth hurts before it heals. We attended the 10 o'clock service at First Presbyterian, where I'd worshipped for 40 years. Neither Thomas nor Melissa showed up, though they'd both been baptized there. Pastor Wilson squeezed my hand extra tight during the greeting. "Everything okay, Deborah? You seem troubled." "Just family matters," I said. "Nothing prayer won't help with." After church, Marcus and I prepared a simple lunch of chicken salad sandwiches and fruit. Neither of us had much appetite. "I've been thinking," he said as we washed dishes. "Maybe you should give Mom and Uncle Thomas another chance. People make mistakes when they're stressed." My heart swelled at his capacity for forgiveness. "That's very compassionate, sweetheart. But this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was the culmination of years of choices." At precisely 2 o'clock, both Thomas and Melissa arrived, together this time, having clearly coordinated their approach. Thomas carried a bouquet of lilies, my favorite flowers. Melissa held a bakery box from Morgan's, the expensive patisserie downtown. I almost laughed at the transparent attempt to butter me up. For years, they'd brought nothing but criticism to my home. Now, suddenly, they remembered my favorite flowers and desserts. "Come in," I said, holding the door open. "Marcus, could you make coffee, please?" We settled in the living room again, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The flowers and chocolate cake sat on the coffee table, untouched. "Mom," Thomas began, his voice carefully modulated into what I recognized as his closing the deal tone from the bank. "We've had time to reflect on our behavior, and we owe you an apology." "A sincere apology," Melissa added, reaching for my hand, which I subtly moved away. "We've been so caught up in our own problems that we failed to see yours." I studied them both. My firstborn son with his thinning hair and expensive watch. My daughter with her perfect manicure and designer clothes. Both of them looking at me with what they thought passed for contrition. "Tell me something," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "If I hadn't won the lottery, would you be sitting here now with flowers and cake, apologizing for hanging up on me when I needed medication?" They exchanged a quick glance, and I had my answer. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. Thomas leaned forward. "Mom, that's not fair. You have to understand our perspective. We've been struggling too. My divorce is costing a fortune in legal fees. Melissa's MBA program. Is that why you told Mike Johnson at your bank that I was showing signs of dementia?" I interrupted. Thomas froze, his mouth hanging open. "What?" "Or why Melissa has been researching guardianship laws, looking into how to have me declared incompetent so you could control my assets?" Melissa went pale. "Mom, how did you really think I wouldn't protect myself?" I pulled out a thick manila folder from beside my chair. "While I was planning my little test these past 3 weeks, I hired a private investigator. The look of horror that passed between them was almost comical." "You had us investigated?" Thomas's voice cracked. "I had my financial situation investigated," I corrected. "When you're worth this kind of money, you want to make sure your assets are protected from people who might take advantage." Marcus, returning with coffee, nearly dropped the tray. "You hired a private investigator, Grandma? That's straight out of a movie." The report was quite thorough, I continued, opening the folder. "For instance, did you know, Marcus, that your mother and uncle have been living well beyond their means for years? The designer clothes, the expensive hobbies, the luxury purchases, all funded by credit cards and occasional bailouts from dear old Mom." I pulled out a spreadsheet. "Over the past 5 years, I've given or loaned Thomas and Melissa $63,000 combined. Not 1 penny has been repaid." "We would have paid you back," Melissa protested weakly. "With what money? You're both barely making your minimum payments as it is." I closed the folder. But here's the interesting part. The investigator also looked into something else for me. Thomas was gripping the arm of the sofa so tightly his knuckles were white. "What else?" Your discussions about my estate. Apparently, you've both been quite vocal at family gatherings about how much this house might be worth, how my life insurance policy would help with your financial situations, and how it would be such a relief when I finally— what was the phrase Melissa used at Christmas? Stopped being a burden and made you both rich. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at his mother in disbelief. You said that about Grandma? How could you? But I wasn't done yet. The real revelation was just beginning. The investigator also discovered that Thomas has been telling people I'm developing dementia, I continued, watching my son's face crumble. Apparently, you've been setting the groundwork to challenge my mental competency should I ever change my will. Marcus whirled around to face his uncle. Uncle Thomas, please tell me that's not true. Thomas's silence was answer enough. Oh, but it gets better, I said, pulling out another document. Melissa, you've been researching guardianship laws, not out of concern for my well-being, but because you found out that if I'm declared incompetent, you and Thomas could potentially gain control of my assets as my closest family members. Melissa's face had gone from red to gray. Mom, that's not— Save it, dear. I have documented evidence. I held up my phone. Amazing what technology can do these days. The investigator gathered quite a comprehensive file on both of you. You had us followed? Thomas whispered. I documented my children's behavior toward their elderly mother. Yes, including the conversation where you both discussed how much easier your lives would be if I had a stroke or heart attack. I set the phone down gently. That was particularly enlightening. Marcus sat down heavily in the chair across from me. I think I'm going to be sick. Don't worry, sweetheart. The good news is that your inheritance is secure, I smiled at him. The bad news for your mother and uncle is that I've taken steps to protect myself and my assets from any future manipulation attempts. Thomas found his voice. What kind of steps? Well, first, I've had myself thoroughly examined by 3 different doctors and a psychiatrist. All have declared me completely mentally competent. Those reports are on file with my lawyers, along with detailed video testimonies about my decision-making process. I was rather proud of my thoroughness. Second, I've restructured my entire estate. Marcus is now my sole heir. Melissa made a sound like a wounded animal. And third, I continued, enjoying their horror, I've decided to have a little fun with my newfound wealth. What do you mean? Melissa asked, though I could see she already suspected. Your creditors received some very interesting phone calls yesterday. The color drained from both my children's faces so quickly I thought they might faint. Mom, what did you do? Thomas demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. I paid off all your debts, I said simply. Thomas's boat loan, Melissa's credit cards, both of your car loans, all of it. Melissa grabbed Thomas's arm. Wait, that's good news, right? Mom, thank you. I didn't pay them off as gifts, dear. I leaned back in my chair, feeling more powerful than I had in years. I bought all your debts from your creditors, every single one. Thomas was doing rapid calculations in his head. You can't do this. There are laws about predatory lending, family exploitation. Actually, there aren't any laws against purchasing legally held debt, even from family members, I explained. I've done my research thoroughly. My lawyers assure me this is completely legal. Unusual, perhaps, but legal. Marcus was staring at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Grandma, what does this mean? It means, sweetheart, that your mother and uncle now owe me instead of their various creditors. And unlike banks and credit card companies, I have very specific feelings about borrowers who consider their lender a burden. Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. How much do we owe you? Thomas, your total debt that I purchased comes to $47,000. Melissa, yours is $52,000. I consulted my paperwork. Plus the $63,000 you both borrowed from me over the years that was never repaid. Grand total. Thomas owes me $78,000. Melissa owes me $89,000. Thomas sat down hard on my sofa. Almost $80,000. That's impossible. Plus the new terms I've implemented as your creditor. 24% annual interest, compounded monthly, no minimum payments, full balance due in 30 days, or I begin legal collection proceedings. We don't have that kind of money, Melissa said, tears streaming down her face again. I know. Thomas's savings account has $1. Melissa's has about $800. I'd done my homework. Which brings us to your options. What options? Thomas asked desperately. You can liquidate your assets. Thomas, sell the boat. That should bring about $15,000 if you're lucky. Melissa, sell your car and buy something cheaper. Maybe save you $10,000. Both of you can pick up second jobs. I was ticking items off on my fingers. That might cover maybe a third of what you owe. There has to be another way, Melissa pleaded. Actually, there is. I smiled sweetly. You can ask family for help. After all, family supports each other, right? That's what you told me I should rely on. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Mom, please. Thomas's voice broke. I know we messed up. I know we treated you badly. But we're your children. We can make this right. Can you? Because I've been waiting years for you to make things right. And instead, you've just taken more. Melissa suddenly had an idea. Mom, what if we worked for you? We could be your assistants, help manage your finances, take care of the house. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Melissa, sweetheart, you want to work for me? I kept my voice gentle, like I was explaining something to a child. The same daughter who told me my health problems weren't her concern wants to suddenly become my caretaker? Thomas was frantically making phone calls, trying to reach someone who might lend them money. I watched him with detached interest, like observing a science experiment. Thomas, who are you calling? I asked during a pause between his unsuccessful attempts. Anyone who might help us. Our friends, extended family, people from work. And what are you telling them? He paused, realizing the trap. I'm telling them we need financial help. Just like I needed help with my medication, I nodded thoughtfully. I wonder how many of them will tell you to figure it out yourselves. Marcus had been quiet through this entire exchange, but now he spoke up. Mom, Uncle Thomas, why don't you just apologize? Really apologize, not just say sorry because you got caught. Thomas stopped dialing and looked at his nephew. I am sorry, Marcus. We both are. Sorry for what specifically? I asked. I want to hear you say it. We're sorry for not helping you when you asked. Thomas's words came out slowly, like he was pulling teeth. And for taking your money without paying it back over the years. And, Melissa jumped in, for saying mean things about you behind your back. Getting warmer. What else? Thomas's shoulders sagged. For planning to have you declared incompetent so we could control your money. For discussing how much easier our lives would be if you died. The words came out in a rush, like he was ripping off a bandage. I nodded approvingly. Very good. Now was that so hard? Does this mean you'll help us? Melissa asked hopefully. Help you what? Pay debts you legitimately owe? Why would I do that? I tilted my head. Melissa, when I needed help with my medication, what did you tell me? Her face crumpled. I told you to figure it out. Exactly. So now I'm telling you both the same thing. Figure it out. Thomas's phone rang and he answered it desperately. Hello? Yes, this is Thomas Taylor. A pause. No, we're not asking for money for drugs or gambling. We need help with legitimate debts. Another pause. Longer this time. What do you mean, what have I done to deserve help? I'm family. I could hear the voice on the other end getting louder. Thomas held the phone away from his ear. "They hung up," he said in disbelief. "How strange," I commented. "Family refusing to help family in need. Who would do such a thing?" But I wasn't finished with my lesson yet. The best part was still coming. "Thomas, Melissa, I have a confession to make." I stood up and walked to my kitchen, returning with a bottle of champagne that had been chilling in my refrigerator. "I've been planning this moment for 3 weeks, and I think it calls for a celebration." Marcus watched me pop the cork with practiced ease. "Grandma, what are you celebrating?" "The fact that your mother and uncle are about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives." I poured myself a glass and raised it in a toast. "To family loyalty. May it be treasured by those wise enough to value it." "Mom, what are you talking about?" Melissa asked, her voice small and defeated. "Sit down, both of you. I want to tell you about the rest of my plans." I settled back into my chair with my champagne. "You see, buying your debts was just the beginning." Thomas gripped Melissa's hand. "What do you mean, the beginning?" "Well, Thomas, remember your friend Mike from the bank? The one you've been telling about my supposed dementia?" I sipped my champagne slowly. "Turns out Mike did some research into my finances when he heard you might need help with guardianship proceedings." Thomas went very still. "What kind of research?" "The kind that involves public records, lottery winner databases, and financial filings. Mike discovered something very interesting." I paused for effect. "He found out about my lottery win." "No," Melissa whispered. "Oh, yes. And Mike, being the upstanding citizen he is, contacted several people at the bank to share this fascinating information." I was thoroughly enjoying their horror. "By now, everyone in your professional circles knows that Thomas and Melissa Taylor's mother won $200 million, and they were trying to have her declared incompetent to steal it." Thomas's face had gone completely white. "They don't know the whole story." "Don't they? Because the story they heard is that a loving mother who helped her children financially for years won the lottery, and instead of being grateful, they plotted to have her committed so they could steal her money." I took another sip. "How do you think that's playing at your workplaces?" Melissa was crying again. "Mom, Thomas's job, my reputation, everyone will think exactly what they should think," I interrupted. "That you're both greedy, ungrateful people who tried to take advantage of your elderly mother." Marcus was staring at me with something approaching awe. "Grandma, you orchestrated all of this, didn't you?" "Orchestrated is such a dramatic word. I simply allowed your mother and uncle to show their true colors, then made sure the appropriate people knew about it." I smiled at my grandson. "Marcus, would you like to know what you're inheriting?" His eyes widened. "All of it?" "Every penny. But more importantly, you're inheriting something your mother and uncle will never have again." I raised my glass once more. "A family member who trusts you completely." Thomas and Melissa were about to discover that money was the least of what they'd lost. "The trust documents were signed this morning," I continued, savoring every word. "Marcus receives everything when I pass away, but there's more. I've also established a college fund that will pay for your education through graduate school, and a living allowance that ensures you'll never have to worry about money while you're studying." Marcus was speechless, but Thomas found his voice. "Mom, you can't just cut us out completely. We're your children." "You were my children," I corrected gently. "Now you're just people who happen to share my DNA and my last name. Being family requires more than biology, Thomas. It requires love, respect, and basic human decency." Melissa was hyperventilating. "What about our futures? We have nothing now." "You have exactly what you gave me when I needed help," I said simply. "Nothing." I walked to my desk and pulled out one final document. "However, I'm not completely heartless. I've made arrangements for both of you." Thomas's head snapped up. What kind of arrangements? I've arranged for you to have jobs. I handed him the paper. Thomas, there's a dishwashing position available at Miller's Diner, where I used to work double shifts to pay for your college. Minimum wage, but honest work. Thomas stared at the job application like it was written in a foreign language. And Melissa, I've spoken to the manager at the local grocery store. They need someone for the overnight stocking shift. Again, minimum wage, but it's employment. You want us to work minimum wage jobs? Melissa's voice was shrill. I want you to understand what it feels like to work for every dollar while people you love treat you like you're worthless. I sat back down, feeling lighter than I had in years. Consider it character building. Marcus finally found his voice. Grandma, I don't know what to say. Say you'll use this money wisely. Say you'll remember that wealth doesn't make you better than other people. It just gives you more responsibility to be kind. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Say you'll never take family for granted the way your mother and uncle did. I promise, he whispered, tears in his eyes. Thomas made one last desperate attempt. Mom, please, we'll do anything. We'll pay you back every penny. We'll apologize publicly. Thomas, stop! I held up my hand. You'll do those things because you got caught, not because you're sorry. There's a difference. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I'd tended for 30 years. You know what's funny? If you had just helped me when I asked, if you had shown even basic kindness to someone who gave you life, none of this would have happened. I would have shared my fortune gladly. We can start over, Melissa pleaded. We can be the family you want us to be. I turned around and looked at these two people I had raised, who had shared my holidays, who had taken my money and my love for granted for so many years. No, I said simply. You can't, because I finally learned something important. What's that? Thomas asked, his voice barely audible. You can't buy love, but you can definitely put a price on greed. And you've both shown me exactly what that price is. Marcus stood up and hugged me tightly. Thank you, Grandma, for everything, for the test, for the lesson, for trusting me. As Thomas and Melissa left my house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. My grandson had everything he needed for a bright future, and I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable the people who take your love for granted. The lottery had given me money, but my children had given me something far more valuable, the knowledge of who truly deserved my trust. And that, my friends, was worth every penny of those $333 million. The house felt strangely empty after Thomas and Melissa left. Marcus stayed for dinner, but even his cheerful presence couldn't fully dispel the heaviness in my heart. I'd won the battle, but wondered about the cost of the war. Are you okay, Grandma? Marcus asked as we washed dishes side by side, just like we used to do when he was small enough to need a step stool. Just tired, sweetheart. I handed him a plate to dry. It's been an emotional day. Do you regret it? What you did to Mom and Uncle Thomas? I paused, considering the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they made choices that led us here. But no, I don't regret showing them the consequences of treating people as disposable. Marcus nodded slowly. It's just, they're still your kids. And Mom is still my mom. I know, honey. I squeezed his arm gently. And nothing changes that. This isn't about erasing them from our lives. It's about establishing boundaries and respect. That night, after Marcus went back to his dorm room, but not before I insisted he take an envelope with $5,000 in cash for emergencies, I sat alone on my porch swing. The same swing where James and I had spent countless evenings watching the sunset, dreaming about our future. "Did I go too far, James?" I whispered to the evening star. "Would you have done the same?" The night offered no answers, but the gentle creaking of the swing reminded me of how James used to rock it, his arm around my shoulders, telling me I was stronger than I knew. The next morning brought the first ripples of my tsunami. Beverly called at 8 a.m. sharp. "Deborah, we need to talk. Thomas has been calling my office since 6 a.m. He's threatening legal action." I sighed, pouring my morning coffee. "What kind of legal action?" "The desperate kind," she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Claims of elder abuse, undue influence, breach of fiduciary duty. He's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks." "And will any of it stick?" "Not a chance. We documented everything meticulously. Your competency is well established. The trust is ironclad." She paused. "But it's going to get ugly before it gets better. Are you prepared for that?" Was I? I thought about the look on Thomas's face as he'd left yesterday, the raw hurt beneath the anger, the severed trust that might never heal. "I have to be," I said finally. "They need to understand that actions have consequences." "Well, you've certainly driven that point home," Beverly replied. "By the way, Melissa called the lottery commission trying to contest your claim. They shut her down immediately, but she's not giving up." I closed my eyes, feeling a headache forming. And so it begins. It wasn't just Thomas and Melissa who reacted. By noon, my phone was buzzing with messages from extended family, cousins I hadn't heard from in years, James's sister in Florida, even my ex-daughter-in-law, all suddenly concerned about my mental state and offering to help manage my windfall. Walter came by with lunch and updates from town. "It's the talk of Miller's Diner," he reported, setting down a bag of sandwiches. "Thomas went in this morning, white as a sheet, asking about that dishwashing job. Judy at the register said he looked like he was about to throw up when he filled out the application." I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a strange hollowness. "Has he been at the bank today?" "No, and that's another thing. Word is his boss called him in for a meeting tomorrow morning. Doesn't look good." Melissa's situation was equally dire. She'd called in sick to her marketing job, but according to Patricia, whose daughter worked in the same office, the gossip had already spread. The ambitious, polished Melissa Taylor had been plotting to have her mother declared incompetent to steal her lottery winnings. In a small Ohio town, that kind of reputation was career suicide. By evening, both Thomas and Melissa were calling me nonstop. I let the calls go to voicemail, listening to their increasingly desperate pleas. "Mom, please, my boss is threatening to let me go. This is my career we're talking about. Call me back." "Mom, I'm sorry, okay? Really sorry. Marcus won't even talk to me. Please, I need your help." My heart ached, but I reminded myself of the lessons they needed to learn. They weren't sorry for what they'd done. They were sorry they'd been caught. There's a difference. Michael Harris called with financial updates. "The trusts are all established, Deborah. Marcus's education fund is set up with $2 million, enough for any graduate program he might choose. Your personal trust has $50 million for immediate use. The remaining funds are invested conservatively, generating approximately $6 million annually in interest alone." The numbers were meaningless to me. What could one person possibly do with all that money? "I'd like to set up a charitable foundation," I said suddenly. "Something to help elderly people who are struggling with medical costs. Can we work on that?" "Absolutely," Michael replied, sounding pleased. "I'll have some proposals ready by next week." That night I took my heart medication, no more rationing needed, and flipped through old photo albums. Thomas on his first bicycle, Melissa in her graduation cap, family vacations at Lake Erie, birthday parties with homemade cakes. Where had those children gone? When had money and status become more important than kindness? I fell asleep with the album open on my lap. Tears dried on my cheeks. The following week was a blur of legal meetings, financial planning, and avoiding my children's increasingly frantic attempts to contact me. Thomas had indeed been placed on administrative leave at the bank, not formally fired, but effectively sidelined. Melissa's company was reviewing her position after clients began asking to work with someone else. Marcus called daily, torn between loyalty to me and concern for his mother. "She's not eating, Grandma. She just cries all day." The neighbors said debt collectors have already started calling. I steeled myself against the pang of maternal instinct. "Consequences, Marcus. That's what this is about." "I know. But isn't there a way to teach them without destroying them?" His question haunted me. Was I becoming as cold and calculating as they had been? Where was the line between justice and vengeance? I decided to meet with my friends for guidance. Ruth, Patricia, and Eleanor gathered at my house for coffee, listening as I poured out my conflicted feelings. "They're suffering, and I feel terrible about it," I admitted. "But if I bail them out now, what lesson will they learn?" Ruth, always the pragmatist, stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "Tough love isn't about punishing, Deborah. It's about teaching." "And what exactly am I teaching them by watching them lose everything?" I asked. Eleanor, the most compassionate of our group, reached for my hand. "Maybe the question isn't what you're teaching them, but what you're teaching yourself. Can you live with this version of yourself?" Patricia nodded. "You've shown them your power, Debbie. That was necessary. But strength isn't just about wielding power. It's about knowing when to show mercy." "They were planning to have me declared incompetent," I reminded them. They discussed how my death would make their lives easier. "Yes, and that's unforgivable," Ruth agreed. "But they're still your children. The same ones you rocked to sleep, taught to ride bikes, helped through heartbreaks." I got up and walked to the window, looking out at my garden where both Thomas and Melissa had once played. The rose bushes James and I had planted on our 25th anniversary were in full bloom, a riot of pink and yellow against the green. "What would James do?" I asked softly. Patricia smiled. "He'd be furious at first. You know how protective he was of you. But then he'd find a path to forgiveness that didn't sacrifice your dignity." "Maybe there's a middle ground," Eleanor suggested. "A way to help them rebuild without simply erasing the consequences." I nodded slowly. "I need to think about this." Later that afternoon, I had a surprise visitor. Beverly arrived with a stack of legal documents and a concerned expression. "Thomas is escalating," she said without preamble. "He's found a lawyer willing to file for an emergency competency hearing." "On what grounds?" "That your erratic behavior with the lottery winnings demonstrates diminished capacity. It's desperate and won't succeed, but it will be public and messy." I sank into my chair, suddenly exhausted. "He's really going to put me through that?" "It gets worse. They're painting Marcus as someone taking advantage of your condition, claiming he's manipulating you for his own gain." My blood boiled at that. Sweet, generous Marcus, who had offered his last penny to help me, was being smeared by his own family. "Stop them," I said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Beverly studied me for a moment. "Are you sure you want to escalate this further? Once we go down this road—" "They've left me no choice," I interrupted. "If they want war, they'll get one." After Beverly left, I called Marcus to warn him about what was coming. He sounded devastated. "Uncle Thomas is saying I manipulated you. How could he think that?" "He doesn't really think it, sweetheart. He's desperate and lashing out." "This has to stop, Grandma," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "We're tearing the family apart." He was right, of course. This vendetta was consuming us all. But how could I find a path forward that honored both justice and mercy? That night, I had a vivid dream about James. We were sitting on our porch swing, watching a storm roll in over the horizon. "That's a big one coming," he said, his arm around me. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for it," I admitted. He smiled that crooked smile I missed so much. "Sure you are, Debbie. But remember, the strongest trees bend with the wind. They don't break because they know when to give a little." I woke up with tears on my face and clarity in my heart. The next morning I called Beverly. "We need a new strategy." While my personal drama unfolded, I decided it was time to start living the life that my new financial freedom allowed. If not now at 67, then when? I'd always wanted to see Paris. James and I had planned to go for our 40th anniversary, but his heart condition had worsened, and we'd canceled the trip. Now, with unlimited resources and no one to answer to, I booked a first-class ticket and a suite at a hotel overlooking the Seine. Before leaving, I met with Beverly and Michael to implement my new strategy. It wasn't about surrendering. It was about finding a smarter path to the outcome I wanted. "Are you sure about this?" Beverly asked as I signed the documents. "You're giving them an opportunity they may not deserve." "Everyone deserves a chance to redeem themselves," I replied. "Even Thomas and Melissa. But redemption has to be earned, not given." With my legal and financial affairs in order, I packed my bags for Paris. I'd never traveled internationally alone. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Walter drove me to the airport. "You're a brave woman, Deborah Taylor." I laughed. "Brave or foolish? I can barely order in a French restaurant." "You won the lottery and outsmarted your conniving children. I think you can handle ordering a croissant." As the plane lifted off, I felt a weight lifting too. For 2 weeks, I wouldn't be the lottery winner, the disappointed mother, or the woman fighting for respect. I'd just be Deborah, an American tourist discovering Paris for the first time. My hotel room overlooked the Seine, with a view of Notre Dame in the distance. I stood on the balcony that first night, watching the city of lights come alive, and felt James's presence so strongly I could almost hear him whisper, "We made it, Debbie." I did everything we'd planned to do together. I visited the Louvre and spent 3 hours just in the wing with the Mona Lisa. I took a boat ride down the Seine. I ate at sidewalk cafes and practiced my terrible French on patient waiters. I bought a ridiculously expensive scarf at a boutique on the Champs-Élysées just because I could. One evening, sitting alone at a small restaurant, I noticed an older couple at the next table. They were probably in their 70s, holding hands across the table, sharing a bottle of wine. The woman caught me looking and smiled. "Anniversary?" she asked in an English accent. "No," I replied, "just treating myself to a dream deferred." "Good for you," she said. "Too many women wait for permission to live the lives they want." Her words stayed with me. How much of my life had I spent waiting for permission? Permission to pursue my own dreams after raising children. Permission to prioritize my needs after caring for James through his illness. Permission to demand respect from the very people who should have given it freely. No more waiting. When I returned to Ohio, tanned and rejuvenated, I had a new sense of purpose. The first thing I did was schedule the knee replacement surgery I'd been putting off for years because of the cost. Medicare would have covered part of it, but the deductibles and copays had been beyond my reach. Now I could afford the best surgeon and the best physical therapy afterward. While recovering from surgery, I enrolled in an online art history course, something I'd always been interested in but never had time to pursue. I joined a book club at the library. I hired a landscaper to transform my backyard into the English garden I'd always wanted. Most importantly, I started volunteering at a senior center downtown, where I met dozens of women my age and older who were struggling with the same issues I had faced: limited income, health concerns, and often family who saw them as burdens rather than blessings. These women became my new community. We shared stories, supported each other through health scares, and celebrated small victories. I didn't tell them about my lottery win. I was just Deborah, the new volunteer with the recently replaced knee. It was there I met Loretta Jackson, an 82-year-old former nurse who couldn't afford her glaucoma medication. "If I lose my sight, I lose my independence," she told me matter-of-factly. "But I have to choose between medication and food some months." Her story sparked an idea that would eventually become my legacy. Meanwhile, Marcus visited regularly, updating me on his studies and, cautiously, on his mother and uncle. "Mom's taken that overnight stocking job," he reported one Sunday afternoon as we sat on the porch swing. "She comes home exhausted, but she's doing it, and she's selling a lot of her designer stuff online." "And Thomas?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Marcus hesitated. "He's struggling. The bank put him on indefinite leave. He's washing dishes at Miller's during dinner shifts, but it's not enough to cover his mortgage. He's talking about selling his house." I nodded, feeling a complex mix of vindication and sadness. "And how are you handling all this?" Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his grandfather's that it made my heart ache. "It's weird, Grandma. At school, I'm the same person I've always been, but now there's this trust fund and all this expectation. Mom calls crying, then gets angry when I won't ask you to forgive her. Uncle Thomas barely speaks to me. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle, sweetheart. Don't be. I'm learning a lot about people, about what matters." He looked at me earnestly. "I'm just worried about you being alone. Are you happy, Grandma?" The question caught me off guard. Was I happy? I had financial security, new friends, new interests. I'd seen Paris. I had a knee that didn't ache when it rained. "I'm getting there," I answered honestly. "I'm building a life that's mine, not defined by being someone's mother or widow. It's liberating." Marcus grinned. "Good, because you deserve to be happy." As he was leaving, he hesitated at the door. "Mom's birthday is next weekend. She's not expecting anything, but I think she might be ready to really talk, if you wanted to." I watched him drive away in his silver Honda, thinking about bridges burned and bridges that might, with care and time, be rebuilt. 3 months after my confrontation with Thomas and Melissa, I received a letter, not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter from Thomas. The handwriting was familiar but shakier than I remembered, as if he'd deliberated over each word. "Dear Mom, I've started this letter 100 times in my head. Nothing sounds right. Nothing is adequate. How do you apologize for betraying the person who gave you life? I've been washing dishes at Miller's for 6 weeks now. My hands are cracked and raw. I come home smelling like grease. My BMW was repossessed last week. I'm selling my house and moving into an apartment above the hardware store, the one we used to walk to for penny candy when I was little. Do you remember? I don't tell you this for sympathy. I tell you because for the first time in my adult life, I understand what it means to struggle, to count pennies, to worry about keeping the lights on. I've had a lot of time to think while scrubbing pots, about the kind of man I've become, about how I treated you, about what I almost did to you. There's no excuse, none. I could tell you about the pressure of the divorce, about falling behind on child support, about the constant fear of failure. But those are explanations, not justifications. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now, and I am deeply, profoundly sorry for the pain I caused you. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. If not, I understand, and I'll respect your decision. With love and regret. Thomas. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. There was a rawness to it, an absence of the polished banker's vocabulary Thomas usually employed. It felt real. I tucked the letter into my bedside drawer, not yet ready to respond, but unwilling to throw it away. A week later, on Melissa's birthday, I decided to take Marcus's hint. I didn't call or visit, but I sent a simple card with a gift certificate to a local spa. Not an extravagant one, but enough for a basic massage and facial. The note inside read simply, "Every woman deserves self-care on her birthday. Mom." 2 days later, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Melissa stood on my porch, looking nothing like the polished marketing executive she'd once been. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, and she wore jeans and a plain sweater instead of her usual designer outfits. "Mom," she said, her voice small and uncertain. "Can I come in?" I hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. "Tea?" "Please." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where we'd had countless family meals, homework sessions, and heart-to-hearts over the years. "Thank you for the gift certificate," she said, wrapping her hands around the mug of tea. "It was unexpected." "Everyone deserves kindness on their birthday," I replied neutrally. Melissa stared into her tea. "I don't. Not after what I did." I said nothing, waiting. "I've been working at Kroger for 2 months now," she continued, "stocking shelves from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. My hands are constantly paper-cut from opening boxes. My back hurts all the time. I sleep during the day while Marcus is at school, then get up and do it all again." She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed. "I sold my Mercedes, and most of my clothes. The debt collectors call every day. I had to drop out of my MBA program." "I'm sorry it's been difficult," I said carefully. "No, Mom, don't apologize." Melissa shook her head firmly. "I earned this. Every bit of it. I was horrible to you, ungrateful, selfish." Her voice broke. "I told you your health problems weren't my concern. What kind of daughter says that to her mother?" The tears started then, silent streams down her cheeks. "The worst part isn't the job or the debt or even people in town talking about me. It's knowing that I betrayed the one person who always supported me, who worked double shifts to pay for my dance lessons, who helped me through my divorce when I was at my lowest." I felt my own eyes filling with tears. "Why, Melissa? That's what I don't understand. Where did I go wrong that both my children could treat me as disposable?" She wiped her eyes with a tissue. "It wasn't you, Mom. It was us. We got caught up in our lives, our problems. It was easier to see you as a resource than as a person with your own needs. And then when money got tight, we started resenting you. For aging. For needing things." Her honesty was brutal but necessary. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued, "or money. I know I have to earn back your trust, and that might take years, or it might never happen, but I needed you to know that I understand now, and I'm so, so sorry." I reached across the table and took her hand, the first physical contact we'd had in months. "Thank you for coming, for saying these things." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Finally, Melissa stood up. "I should go. My shift starts in a few hours, and I need to sleep." At the door, she turned back. "Mom, Thomas is hurting too. He'd never admit it, but he cries in his car after shifts. His ex-wife won't let him see the kids because he's behind on support payments." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After she left, I sat on my porch swing, processing our conversation. There had been no manipulation in Melissa's words, no angle being worked. Just raw honesty and regret. Was it enough? Could trust, once shattered so completely, ever be fully restored? I didn't have answers yet. but for the first time I felt the faintest stirring of something that might, eventually, grow into forgiveness. 2 weeks after Melissa's visit, I invited Thomas to meet me for coffee at a neutral location, the small cafe downtown where James and I used to have Sunday brunch. It felt important to have this conversation on equal ground, not in my home where the power dynamic would be too obvious. He arrived early, dressed in khakis and a simple button-down shirt, a far cry from his former tailored suits. His face looked thinner, more lined, and his eyes had lost their confident gleam. "Mom," he said, standing awkwardly as I approached the table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." We ordered coffee and sat in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes before I finally spoke. "I got your letter." Thomas nodded, staring into his coffee. "I meant every word." "I believe you do. Now." I stirred a packet of sugar into my cup. But trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. "I know." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I don't expect anything from you. I needed to see you, to tell you in person how sorry I am." "For which part, Thomas? For refusing to help with my medication? For blocking my number? For discussing how my death would make your life easier? Or for trying to have me declared incompetent?" He flinched with each question, but didn't look away. "For all of it. For becoming someone who could do those things to his own mother." We talked for over an hour. Thomas told me about losing his position at the bank, about washing dishes alongside teenagers for minimum wage, about selling his house and most of his possessions, about his ex-wife using his financial collapse to further restrict his visitation with their children. "The ironic thing," he said with a bitter laugh, "is that I finally understand what you went through all those years. Working multiple jobs to support us, sacrificing everything for family. I just wish I hadn't needed to lose everything to learn that lesson." Before we parted, I handed him an envelope. Inside was information about my new charitable foundation, the James Taylor Senior Care Initiative, which would help elderly people afford their medications. "I'm looking for a program director," I said carefully. "Someone who understands financial management but also has newfound empathy for people struggling with healthcare costs. The pay is modest compared to banking, but it's honest work." Thomas stared at the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. "Mom, are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity to rebuild. What you make of it is up to you." That evening, I called Beverly and Michael to discuss my evolving plan for Thomas and Melissa. "Are you sure about this?" Beverly asked, concern evident in her voice. "They tried to declare you incompetent just 3 months ago." "I'm not forgetting what they did," I assured her, "or naively trusting them again. But they're showing genuine remorse and change. I want to create a path forward with proper safeguards." We spent hours hammering out the details of what I called the redemption trusts, conditional funds that would be established for Thomas and Melissa, with strict requirements for access. First, they would need to continue working their current jobs for a minimum of 6 months, no shortcuts or easy outs. Second, they would need to undergo family therapy, both individually and with me, to address the root causes of their behavior. Third, they would need to perform 500 hours of community service with elderly populations. And finally, they would need to develop and present a detailed plan for how they would use any funds they received, with emphasis on debt repayment, education, and sustainable living rather than luxury items. Only after all conditions are met will they receive limited access to their trusts, I explained. And even then, it will be structured to prevent misuse. Michael nodded approvingly. Tough but fair. It gives them a chance without enabling bad behavior. "And the foundation job for Thomas?" Beverly asked. "Probationary for the first year, with close supervision and clear expectations." As we finalized the documents, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't about punishing or rewarding my children. It was about creating a framework for genuine change and growth for all of us. Meanwhile, my own life continued to evolve in unexpected ways. My knee replacement had been successful, and I was walking without pain for the first time in years. I'd made new friends through the senior center and my book club. I'd even started dating, cautiously, a retired English professor named William, who shared my love of classic literature and gardening. Marcus flourished in school, but more importantly, he was developing a mature perspective on wealth and responsibility. We spoke often about the foundation and how it might grow to help more seniors in need. "This is your legacy, Grandma," he said during one of our planning sessions. "Not just the money, but what you're doing with it." I smiled, thinking of how proud James would be of the young man our grandson had become. "Our legacy, Marcus. Someday you'll lead this foundation." "With Mom and Uncle Thomas?" he asked carefully. "Perhaps, if they earn that privilege." 6 months passed, bringing changes both subtle and profound. Thomas threw himself into his position at the foundation with unexpected passion. His financial expertise proved valuable, but more importantly, he developed genuine relationships with the seniors we served. The man who had once complained about my excessive medical costs now advocated fiercely for better prescription coverage for our clients. Melissa completed her overnight stocking job requirement and transferred to a daytime position in the store's marketing department, a humble role compared to her previous career, but one that utilized her skills. She also resumed her MBA studies, taking one course at a time while working full-time. Most significantly, both my children attended therapy faithfully. Individual sessions, family sessions with me, and even sibling sessions to address long-standing rivalries that had contributed to our family dysfunction. In our third family therapy session, Thomas finally articulated the core issue that had poisoned our relationship. "I resented you, Mom," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "After Dad died, you were so strong, so capable. You never seemed to need anything from anyone, and it made me feel unnecessary, like you were judging me for not measuring up to your standard." I sat back, genuinely shocked. "That's how you saw me? As judging you? You never complained, never asked for help, never seemed vulnerable, so when you finally did ask for help with your medication, it felt like a test. Like you were seeing if we'd measure up." "It was a test," I reminded him gently, "but not the kind you think. I wasn't testing if you measured up to some standard. I was testing if you saw me as a person worthy of basic compassion." Melissa nodded slowly. "We failed that test spectacularly." "Yes," I agreed. "You did, but the important thing is what you're doing now." By the 9-month mark, both Thomas and Melissa had made significant progress on their redemption requirements. Thomas had completed his community service hours, working weekends at a nursing home. Melissa was halfway through hers, teaching marketing skills to seniors wanting to sell crafts online. During a particularly meaningful therapy session, our counselor asked each of us to share one thing we'd learned through this difficult journey. "I've learned that wealth doesn't determine worth," Thomas said. "Some of the most valuable people I've met are living on Social Security and Medicare." "I've learned that it's never too late to change," Melissa offered. "I thought I was too old at 42 to start over, but here I am, rebuilding from scratch. When my turn came, I took a deep breath. I've learned that forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a process. And it's as much for me as it is for the person being forgiven." That evening, I invited Thomas and Melissa to my home for dinner, the first time we'd shared a meal together since the confrontation. Marcus came too, acting as a buffer and bridge between us. The conversation was cautious at first, carefully avoiding landmines of resentment and guilt. But as the evening progressed, Moments of genuine warmth emerged. Melissa helped me serve dessert, just as she had as a teenager. Thomas fixed the loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen that had been bothering me for months. As they were leaving, I handed each of them an envelope. "What's this?" Thomas asked, looking uncertain. "Open it at home," I suggested. "It's the next step." Inside each envelope was a letter outlining the redemption trust I'd established, the conditions they'd already met and those still required, the potential funds available, and most importantly, my acknowledgement of their efforts to change. The next day, Melissa called, her voice choked with tears. "Mom, I don't deserve this." "It's not about deserving, Melissa. It's about growth. And you're growing." Thomas sent a simple text. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Marcus, when I showed him copies of the trust documents, hugged me tightly. "You're something else, Grandma." Tough but fair. "Like your grandfather," I smiled, thinking of James's favorite saying, "Love without limits, but never without expectations." A year after my lottery win, we held a family dinner to mark the milestone. So much had changed in 12 months. Thomas had been promoted to full program director at the foundation, his probationary period successfully completed. He'd moved into a modest house and was rebuilding his relationship with his children, who now visited him regularly. Melissa had completed her MBA and was working in marketing for a nonprofit serving disadvantaged women, a far cry from her high-powered corporate role, but work that gave her genuine satisfaction. She and Marcus had repaired much of the damage to their relationship, and I had found a new purpose. The foundation was thriving, helping hundreds of seniors afford their medications. I'd traveled to France, Italy, and Greece, trips James and I had planned but never taken. I'd made new friends and even enjoyed the companionship of William, though we both agreed we were too set in our ways for anything beyond friendship. Most importantly, I'd discovered my own strength, not the grim determination that had carried me through widowhood and financial struggles, but a more centered power that came from knowing my own worth. "I'd like to propose a toast," Marcus said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings, hard lessons, and the strongest woman I know, my grandmother." As we clinked glasses, I caught Thomas and Melissa exchanging a look, not of resentment or jealousy, but of genuine agreement. They had learned to see me clearly at last. The second year after my lottery win brought unexpected joys and challenges. The James Taylor Senior Care Initiative expanded to 3 neighboring counties, helping over 1,000 seniors access medications they couldn't otherwise afford. Thomas proved to be an excellent director, combining his financial acumen with newfound empathy. He often shared stories of clients who reminded him of me, independent, proud people who needed support, but not pity. Melissa's nonprofit work flourished, and she started dating one of the organization's board members, a kind, unpretentious man who knew nothing of her former wealth or fall from grace. She seemed happier than I'd seen her in years, focused on building something meaningful rather than acquiring status symbols. Marcus graduated a semester early, and to my surprise asked to work at the foundation for a year before starting graduate school. "I want to understand the business from the ground up," he explained. "If I'm going to lead it someday, I need to know every aspect." My own life settled into a rhythm that balanced independence with family connections. I hosted Sunday dinners twice a month. I traveled when the mood struck, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends from my book club. I volunteered regularly at the senior center where I'd found community during my darkest days. The redemption trusts for Thomas and Melissa matured as they met all the conditions. The funds weren't lottery winner extravagant, $2 million each, enough to provide security without encouraging excess. Both chose to invest rather than spend, having learned hard lessons about financial responsibility. On the anniversary of James's death, I visited his grave with fresh flowers, yellow roses, his favorite. I sat on the small bench beside his headstone as I did every year and told him about all that had happened. "You wouldn't believe it, James," I said, arranging the roses in the cemetery vase. "Your children finally grew up. At 45 and 42, but better late than never, right?" I smiled, imagining his deep chuckle. "Marcus is the spitting image of you, not just his looks, but his heart. He's going to do great things with the foundation someday." A gentle breeze rustled the nearby oak tree, the one James and I had picnicked under when we were dating 60 years ago. "I miss you every day," I continued, "but I'm doing okay. Better than okay, actually. I'm living, James, really living." As I walked back to my car, I spotted Thomas waiting respectfully by the cemetery gate. He'd started joining me for these visits recently, finding his own healing and connecting with his father's memory. "How are you doing, Mom?" he asked as we walked together toward the parking lot. "Good days and bad days," I replied honestly. "Today is a good one." He nodded, understanding the grief that never fully disappears, just changes form over time. "The foundation received another major donation yesterday," he said as we drove back toward town. $5 million from the Hendricks Family Trust. They were impressed with our medication program. "That's wonderful," I smiled, proud of what we were building together. "I was thinking," Thomas continued cautiously, "we might expand the services to include some dental care. Medicare doesn't cover it, and I'm seeing a lot of seniors suffering with dental pain because they can't afford treatment." "Your father would have approved," I said. James had suffered from terrible toothaches in his final years, another healthcare gap we'd struggled to fill. Later that week, I hosted a planning meeting for the foundation's future. Thomas, Melissa, Marcus, and several board members gathered in my living room, now transformed into a comfortable meeting space for foundation business. As I looked around at the faces, some family, some new friends, I felt a sense of profound gratitude, not for the money, though it had changed all our lives, but for the lessons it had taught us. "Before we begin," I said, standing to address the group, "I want to share something. When I won the lottery 2 years ago, I thought wealth would solve all my problems. What I've learned is that money doesn't change who you are. It reveals it. Money gave me options, but it was love, tough love sometimes, that healed our family." Thomas and Melissa exchanged glances, acknowledging the difficult road we'd traveled. "The foundation isn't just about providing medications or dental care," I continued. "It's about restoring dignity to people who society often renders invisible because of their age. It's about recognizing that worth isn't measured by productivity or wealth." Marcus squeezed my hand as I sat back down, the proud glint in his eyes reminding me so much of James that my heart ached with a sweet mixture of loss and love. That evening, after everyone had gone, I sat on my porch swing watching the sunset, a daily ritual James and I had shared for 40 years of marriage. The lottery ticket that had changed everything was now framed in my study, a reminder of how quickly life can transform. My phone buzzed with a text from Ruth. "Book club tomorrow, 2 p.m. 2 p.m. William asked if you're coming. I think someone has a crush." I smiled, typing back. "Tell him I'll be there. With cookies." At 67, I had found a new chapter I never expected. Financial security, meaningful work, healed family relationships, and maybe even a hint of romance. None of it had come easily. All of it had required courage, boundaries, and the willingness to demand respect. The evening star appeared above my maple tree, the same star James and I used to wish on during our porch swing evenings. "Thank you," I whispered to James, to fate, to whatever divine hand had guided this unlikely journey. For the test, for the lesson, for the second chance. The lottery had given me money, but my children had given me something far more valuable. the opportunity to discover my own strength and the power of conditional forgiveness. And that, my friends, was worth every penny of those $333 million. If you found value in my story, please subscribe to my channel for more life lessons from someone who's been there. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to teach someone a tough lesson about respect? Comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Next week, I'll be sharing 2 more stories that have been channel favorites. Until then, remember that your worth isn't measured by what others think of you, but by how truly you live your values.